Welcome to The Debate. Our material today, well, it dives deep into the internal communications, the chats, really, of the Scarboroughs hockey team. And this gives us a pretty unique window, I think, into their team structure, maybe even their leadership psychology. We're trying to go beyond, the usual stats to figure out the actual structural importance of one player in particular, Josh Liscio.
Right. And the big question, which comes straight out of these communications, is this. Can Josh Liscio genuinely be called the, quote, most important member of the Scarboroughs? And this isn't just about who scores the most goals, right? It's about what foundational value really means in, let's be honest, a pretty chaotic amateur sports setting.
Exactly. And I'll be arguing that Liscio's importance, it really transcends the simple statistics. It's rooted much more in his, rare psychological stability, his relentless commitment, and frankly, his indispensable utility. These are qualities that I believe make him an anchoring, absolutely critical piece for the team's long-term picture.
Okay. And I'll be taking the position that the actual facts, the evidence we have around Liscio's chronic, and it is documented unavailability, and some pretty fundamental skill issues. What they prove his role is peripheral at best. Easily replaceable, often high maintenance. He's, let's say charitably, a valued spare part, maybe, but definitely not the most important player. No way.
Okay, well, I want to start then with the perspective of the guy running the whole show, General Manager Mike MP, because the GM explicitly calls Josh a critical member of the team. That was just this past March. Now, this isn't just, a nice text message. This is an organizational assessment of necessity. My case really hinges on Liscio's temperament. MP notes he has, quote, nerves of steel, mentally tough. Now, when you're managing the kind of volatility you see in an amateur team dynamic, that kind of psychological ballast, it's infinitely more valuable than just raw talent that might, crack under pressure.
Look, I see why you're leaning so hard on the GM's, let's call it enthusiasm. But we have to look at this source material methodologically, right? That critical member quote, it's completely contaminated, I'd argue, by what looks like pretty blatant favoritism. If you actually check the communication log, MP called Liscio a critical member literally moments after he had to basically perform administrative micromanagement for him, like calculating Liscio's exact departure time based on a 25-minute drive just to make sure he got to the rink. I mean, come on, that's not reverence for a critical asset. That's managing a fragile, high-maintenance chore.
But that attention to detail is proof of his value. You only micromanage the assets you simply cannot afford to lose. And furthermore, Liscio is celebrated organizationally as their Swiss Army knife. Now that descriptor, it signifies his universal utility, his effort. He's praised explicitly as the player who never complains, always works hard, and does whatever it takes to win. So when the team needs goals or organizational help, like proactively offering to find goalies, which he did, or even critical recruitment efforts, Liscio steps up. He's the one who brought in Zach Truvadekos. Now, that kind of foundational organizational input, you just can't capture that by counting goals or looking at attendance records alone.
Oh, the Swiss Army knife. That's not a badge of honor. That's just administrative jargon for utility plug. He's necessary only because the rest of the team keeps, falling apart around him. Let's just look at the basic facts around his presence. He is chronically listed as one of the 5 students gone for winter. Chronically. And when the GM expresses, quote, amazingly relief, it's not because, Connor McDavid suddenly showed up. It's because a part-time player merely agreed to spare and prevent what would have been an embarrassing roster shortage. He's a part-time resource, plain and simple, who gets his over-the-top, hyperbolic flattery just to keep him engaged and probably paying his fees. You don't call your most valuable player a utility knife. You call him a cornerstone, a foundation, not a gadget.
Okay, well, that brings us right to point 1 then. Let's deconstruct this Swiss Army knife utility.
Right. Because the whole premise that Liscio is some kind of versatile weapon, it's basically an appeal to the GM's authority. And it rests entirely on a highly motivated, and I would argue, deeply affectionate, almost paternal hyperbole. I mean, if Liscio is this amazing versatile threat, why are his actual physical contributions repeatedly described simply as being, quote, annoying as fuck to play against and a pest? Pests are distractions, annoyances. They are not indispensable anchors. A pest is someone you just kind of tolerate, maybe swat away. It's not someone you build a championship team around.
I really have to strongly disagree with that dismissive characterization of Liscio's style. You're focusing entirely on these qualitative pejoratives, these sort of insults, while completely missing the tactical necessity of that role. The ability to be annoying, to be distracting, that's a highly valued defensive contribution. It prevents the opposition from establishing any kind of rhythm. The methodological flaw, I think, in your argument's ignoring the high praise he receives specifically for his crucial backcheck. MP himself noted, and this is key, that this defensive work is what makes us amazing. Josh Liscio stabilizes the entire unit defensively by preventing goals, which in the long run is far more critical than simply scoring them sometimes.
Oh, are we seriously arguing now that the measure of the most important player on a hockey team is defined by effective harassment and tactical retreat? I mean, even Liscio himself seems to understand his limitations. He self-identifies as a role player and actually claims, quote, "You'll never catch me pulling a toe drag at the blue line anymore." Okay? He has actively retreated from offensive ambition. That's not a Swiss Army knife ready for any task. That's a knife that's basically stuck permanently in its sheath because the owner is kind of afraid to use the main blade.
You're confusing prudence with deficiency. What he's demonstrating there is intellectual maturity. He's adapting his game based on team needs and, importantly, self-analysis. When he admits, quote, "not happy with my performance," that isn't weakness. That is the mark of an elite, reflective contributor who possesses a professional level of accountability. This self-critique actually reinforces the very nerves of steel quality that makes him so valuable in the first place.
Okay, accountability is nice. Commendable, sure, but it doesn't actually score goals or win games, does it? And it certainly doesn't guarantee attendance, which, brings us neatly to point 2, reliability, attendance, and administrative effort. Your entire case seems to rely on Liscio being this deeply committed guy, but the data? The data overwhelmingly points to fragility and, frankly, frequent absence. We see him constantly committing what I call the argument from silence. Mike often has to proactively ask about Liscio's attendance, about his readiness. He's always juggling the team commitment against school and job apps. Look, that's a perfectly reasonable life choice for a student, fine. But it's certainly not the behavior of a foundational, truly indispensable member.
Okay, but I have to introduce a methodological critique of how you're reading that data set. When we analyze amateur sports, especially with students involved, we absolutely must apply contextual filters. We have to employ the concept of selection bias here. Josh is explicitly identified in the material as part of the student contingent. Their seasonal unavailability around exams, holidays, it's structurally expected. It's baked into the team model. So despite this known constraint, his stated desire to return long-term, that elevates his standing far, far above other non-committed players whose absences might also be frequent but lack that crucial element of long-term commitment.
His desire to return, that's just like future hypotheticals versus the current reality. The current reality is he's physically absent a lot. And okay, let's talk about this famous financial commitment you lean on. You claim he's some generous anchor because he paid double for the team party. Yeah, 50 not enough, right? I call that a classic post hoc subsidy, not some grand gesture. He sent that extra $50 shortly after Mike noted, publicly, in the chat, that Steph hasn't paid yet. See? Josh wasn't making some big proactive statement about team finances. He was basically reacting to administrative shaming and essentially paying the cover for the laziness of his peers, which, okay, maybe that's nice of him, but it is absolutely not evidence of being the most important player.
No, it is evidence. It's evidence of profound camaraderie and a genuine material investment in the club's success and its social fabric, something very few players actually exhibit. And furthermore, don't forget, he offered to cover the ice costs for a new prospect they were looking at. Now that shows he understands that organizational health is rooted in financial stability and recruitment. This commitment is written in actual cash,
not just hypothetical words, and it far outweighs minor administrative errors like, signing up twice by accident.
Negligible noise? Are you kidding? Mike had to literally chase him down to get him to register, sending a message saying, and I quote, "Please don't have me chase you to do this. Takes 2 minutes." Okay? If you are the most important member of the team, the general manager should not have to hunt you down for 2 minutes of basic clerical effort like you're some toddler refusing to do chores. That's high-maintenance behavior, not high-value leadership. If his real value is supposedly organizational input, why is his actual organizational execution so consistently sloppy?
That perceived sloppiness is a very small price to pay for the recruitment value and the immense psychological value he provides. But okay, let's move to point 3, technical skill and coachability.
You're trying to frame Liscio as just a utility player. I argue he's actually a highly coachable, almost academic asset to the team. An academic asset who apparently requires remedial tutoring on basic hockey technique. The source material shows Mike Empe constantly sending Liscio technical corrections on pretty fundamental skills, specifically how to even orient his stick properly for a backhand face-off draw. We have logs of Mike telling him, quote, "If you're going backhand, you probably want your stick on the right-hand side." I mean, this level of necessary coaching demonstrates he is still very much a developing player, still focusing on fundamental competence. That's not a critical veteran pillar you rely on under pressure. That's someone still learning the ropes.
See, now you're relying on completely irrelevant microdata, probably taken out of context, intended for continuous advanced improvement. You're failing to contextualize this exchange as actual proof of his coachability, which is the real asset here. You're nitpicking his stick position on a draw. The critical detail isn't the correction itself, it's how Liscio responds to that critique. He engages with the data. He requests line changes based on his own apparently quite sophisticated metrics analysis, noting, quote, "I feed Steph too much and he misses, you'll put it in."
Okay.
This is not a deficient player. This is an academic asset, someone utilizing a metrics-driven approach to enhance overall team performance. This high level of coachability is precisely why Mike predicts he will eventually attain that, quote, veteran vibe. The GM is clearly investing in a long-term future with Liscio, knowing his intellectual commitment, his coachability will eventually translate into physical dominance on the ice.
A veteran vibe is like the participation trophy of compliments. It's what you promise an amateur player to keep them paying their league fees season after season. It's purely aspirational language, not some guarantee of sustained excellence down the line. The basic fact remains, the single most important member of the team should probably not require tutorial videos from the GM on how to orient their stick just to take a proper face-off draw. His foundation seems fragile, technically speaking.
I strongly maintain that Liscio's very engagement with these critiques proves his long-term value, not weakness. The GM clearly views him as capable of absorbing and executing these tactical improvements. That's why he even bothers sending them. Liscio is ultimately the team's stabilizing force. He absorbs the chaos inherent in this league and provides those essential nerves of steel that are absolutely necessary to survive, let alone thrive, through a competitive amateur season.
Well, I remain utterly, completely unconvinced. The concept of most important has to be tethered fundamentally to reliable presence and consistent execution on the ice. And Liscio frequently sacrifices both of those due to external pressures, school, job applications, whatever. While he's certainly well-liked, and maybe he's a fantastic source of hyperbolic praise for the general manager to use for team morale, the actual evidence we have paints him pretty clearly as an expendable, part-time player. His greatest asset seems to be just his willingness to fill the holes created by other people's absences, including, often, his own.
Yet the deep, profound conviction of the general manager, the one person with the most intimate view of team function, of team structure, surely that must hold significant weight. That level of faith, that kind of language, it's typically reserved only for truly indispensable assets.
Perhaps. Or perhaps the measure of a player's true importance has to be left to the listener's own interpretation. Is it defined by reliable availability and current technical skill?
Or is it about long-term potential and maybe the deep, almost religious conviction of a general manager who sees potential, maybe desperately needs potential to anchor what seems like a pretty fragile organization? We'll leave that nuanced decision for you, the listener, to explore further in the material.